Harried everyone. So here we are, once again, looking at New York. We can see some water towers, we can see some taxis. Great set of data that we've got from here. There's one more thing that I really want to bring through, and then I think we can look for some new stuff to do, maybe start looking at a new data set as well. Really start to rip some more stuff apart. It'd be good fun, I think. Before we go any further though, don't forget, if you haven't already, head on down, click like and subscribe and support the channel. If you really like what we're doing, leave a comment. If you don't like what we're doing, leave a comment and tell us what you don't like. Always good to hear from you. So here we are, the New York taxi data set. What I've done to prepare for the disconnected table is I've built the table, right? All it is a table of data. It's not too complicated. Because what I've found is we've got these core metrics that we've built, or these core areas that people are going to want to look at. So we've got kind of the total fares, the total passengers, tips percentage, journeys, average distance and average passengers, right? It's useful stuff to have. What's going on with the taxis? Building that profile up, okay? If you remember, previously we built a calculation group, and a calculation group for the year-over-year percentage change, or the year-over-year changes, is over here. So if I bring that in, we're going to see that, and then I'll be able to drop anything into it. So I could put in, say, the tip percentage, and we'd see how that's changed over time. I could put in the average passenger count, and we can see how that's changed over time. And it doesn't really work with like the year to date because we haven't got years in it, obviously. So let's put those in, and that'll make all the difference, just so this works for us. We'll put years in, switch it to a matrix, and let's put the years in as the rows, and the calculations. There we go. Okay. So suddenly we can see we've got a set of measures that come through and tell us what's going on. Right. It all works. That's really simple. I can do that. That's great. The problem is, right, I need to potentially produce different charts for each one. It would be great if there was a way of just having one chart and just having it all where you could pick and choose what you want to view. And that's often where a disconnected table comes in. And that's also where it starts to draw parallels to what if analyses as well. So if in your data model, you go in under modeling and you want to click new parameter, okay, that's a what if parameter. And what it does is it creates a table, tends to be of numbers. So you end up with a number list. And then from that number list, it will then say to you, what do you want to do? So we might say, for a manufacturing process, what happens if our cost of goods sold goes up by, say, 5%? And we could then factor in what our profit would have been if the cost of goods sold was that much higher, because obviously your total profit is all going to be dependent on the cost of goods. If your cost to sale or your cost to ship goes up or changes, you can use what if parameters to effectively facilitate that understanding. And you can use multiple sets to build up some quite complicated scenarios if you want to. But the essence of it is the same as a disconnected table. It's a table outside the data that references, measures, and alters them. So in terms of your what if parameters, if it went up by 5%, we would have a COGS, cost of goods sold measure going in, and then it would be multiplied by whatever the percentage selection was for increase or decrease of your measure. And you can have quite a nice filter set with that. It works very well. But you need to understand the principles. So let's do that. So what I've done for this, as you say, I've created this table here. Right, and we can see it's just journeys, fares, right? I thought I'll create it before we do the video just because you're not going to want to watch me type it. To do it, I've gone in and on from the Home tab, and you can click to enter data. Yeah, enter data. Just click that, enter in your table of data. And all I've done is I've created it with 2 columns. Right? I use 2 columns just probably because I'm old-fashioned that way. Right? The 2 columns that I use are like an index column or an order column or an ordinal, and Let me just pick this before. Okay. So the ordinal column, which is order, and a name column, which makes it easier. Now I do this because one of the things you could do with your disconnected slicer or with this kind of a table structure is you can actually set things up. So you could, in theory, have multiple language versions of this, and depending on which the person chose, they would see it in different languages. So it's always best to reference in your measures the number. And the order also helps make it appear in the right order. So you can see Journeys was a late addition. Oh, actually, I've missed Journeys, haven't I? Silly man, right? And added it in. And I've put it as 0. So you could change this order. And obviously, lastly, I've said to this to sort it by the order column. So it's always going to be sorted by that. So every time it appears, that's how it's going to appear. And what this means is we've got it as a table here, but in theory, you could put it in your data model as a slicer. So you could pick it, put it as a drop down, and you'd say, well, I want to have this, I want to have Journeys. You'd probably want to say, so you'd probably say that you'd be sensible to set this up, if we look at the selection controls, as a single select, just to be on the safe side. So at the moment it's Journeys, total tips, pasture, whatever you want to do, right? Things like that make sense, okay? And the idea with this is that you want to be able to have a show. So we're going to need like a measure that's going to show us what's selected. And that's kind of the basis of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset this slicer back to being a table. Okay, just so that it makes more sense when we... Okay, so we've got that back as a table. So now what I'm going to write is a measure to show us which one we've selected. So for the sake of these, what I tend to do with disconnected tables is I put the DAX measures that relate to them in the same table because they're kind of a package, they go together. You'll often see in the models that I produce that have like a DAX table rather than a measures table. I call it DAX, and then a secondary one for if I'm creating new measures in thin reports, or in secondary reports, I'll use the secondary folder. So what we're going to do is log in and create what's the one that's shown here. So it's dead easy. So for here, I'm going to right click on it and create a new measure. Now let's zoom in on that so it's easier to see. Let's do it this way rather than zooming in now. Okay. So selected to show equals, this is really simple measure structure, okay? It's going to be the selected value, which means return a single value from this when it's 1, yeah? So when there's only one value in the column, return it. Otherwise, return something else. So in this case, I'm going to say, show me disconnected show name, okay? Otherwise, select a value, say, okay? We'll just do it this way for now, just so it's easy for you to see what's happening. I'm going to click enter. So we've got that. So if I now drag this onto the page and we pick to make it a card, you should see select a value. So if I pick one, I want to see the total passengers, see average distance, I want to see fares. That's simple, I can understand that. So now to make this work, what I need to do is to set up a switch statement. Okay, and switch statements are really, they're like the kind of the super glue that makes this all work. Okay, so I've prepared it earlier because, again, you don't want to see me type all this. Okay, but do not, please, be worried when you see this. Okay, I'll take you through what we're doing. So in this measure, we've created a variable, which is selected. So it's the same pretty much as what we did for the show, but this time we're saying, well, let's return the order, because that's just a number, right? That saves me having to type in that it equals this, equals that, right? Also, for these switch statements, numbers work best, okay? It doesn't really work very well when it's a text validation for these. So numbers are key to it, so I'd recommend that. But it's then going to return, and we do switch true, so it's always going to be there. And we're saying selected equals. So if it equals 0, return journeys. And remember, we've got 0 as our alternate result. So if nothing's selected, it's going to always return the journey count. Okay. We've got the total fares, we've got the total passengers, the total tips, the average distance, the average passengers, and the tips percentage. Okay. Now what you notice is I've put this in a format statement. Okay. And that's one of the big differences between disconnected tables and calculation groups. And it's where calculation groups are able to do something that disconnected measures and disconnected tables can't. And that's have their own number formatting. So there's an issue around doing this, and it's one that you need to be aware of. Okay. So I wanted to show you this. So I've created this disconnected. So let's drop disconnected now onto here instead of having the selector to show. Okay, so we've got now the total journey count. They're saying 5.61 billion. Oh, total fares, sorry. Total fares. It's all right, yeah. That's right. Okay, again, there's no formatting on this. That's part of the issue. That's the issue. So if we unselect everything, we say we've got 325.325 million. Sorry, 0.35 million, which is echoed by here. If we bring, let's bring this here, so it's much easier to see. Okay, if we choose to pick total fares, yep, 5.61 billion. Total passengers, 500 million passengers. That's just madness, isn't it? 500 million passengers. Total tips, $637 million in tips. Okay, average distance of our taxi journeys. Okay, 2.97. It's going to take a while. This is a slow measure to calculate because it's an iterative function, the way it goes through. But you can see it's calculated. We've got our average passenger count. So it does the job. It will focus, it will work. Okay, but the question is it something that's going to work well with my year-over-year calculation? So is it compatible with it? Because that's kind of key, isn't it? That's the point. If we can get this to work, put it in here, say, and it works, right, then that'll do it. And in some ways it does, in a lot of ways it doesn't. Well, it does, yeah, really. Okay, so here we are, we've got our journey counter, because we've got nothing selected. If we choose to look at fares, we'll see it'll bring all the fares information through. That works. The challenge is, if you remember, we had to use a format statement on it. So if we used format statements to get it to work, it stops, it breaks it. Okay, so that's where you're really going to hit that. I need it to be able to use to show a percentage, so it needs to be something that's going to work. It doesn't do it properly. What you can do, and there are ways around all this, everything, there's a way around it. So because we've got the selected show, we can use that to hold a value, and we could then say, let's go into disconnected, drop that down. Let's remove the format, which is effectively turning that number value into text. Yeah, so as you can see, it converts number, the value to text in a specified number format, which is why it doesn't work. It's saying, well, I can't do stuff with text. We remove that, and that all works. So if we say for total tips in our disconnected, now that we know we've got it where it'll work, what happens if we say in disconnected here, for tips, do that, multiplied by 100? Is that going to work? All right. So we can see now, if we look at tips, it's 11.37. Now we know that's percentages. So what we could do is in the selected show, is we could change more elements of this. So we know the name, but what happens if we, for example, go in and edit that and put a format in there? Okay. All right. So here we are back. What I've done is I've added a column, to our table called heading. Okay. And all it's got in is it's the same, but I've just added something to it. And what you can do with this now is I could actually use this as a title because Power BI supports dynamic titles. So what it means for our slicer that we've got here is it now is going to tell us what's selected. So we've got journeys. So, and all I've done, so I'll just show you the measure. I've updated distinct to show headings as opposed to that. Okay. So here we are. We can choose to say, well, total fares. It says, oh, it's total fares in dollars. Makes sense. Tip percentage. Oh, tip percentage. So that's going to work for me if I really want to use it. It will be available. I can put it in, and I can then use those two measures in tandem to work with even my year-over-year calculations to say, well, what do you want to see? Because in theory, you can put in, you can restrict using different things and button selections, your calculated measures that you want to show in terms of from your calculated groups, your calculation items, yeah. And you can then use disconnected tables to influence what measure it is you're going to be looking at. So from us, if you think through what we really wanted with this and what we've shown the most. So I've dropped the map in from our previous stuff, and we've always had it showing just the journey count. But look what I can do now. So using my disconnected tables and of course my calculation items, I can actually say, well, look at the journeys, and we can see year over year how the journeys have changed. So we could pick, say, 2018, and it will filter everything by 2018. That will, the interactivity of Power BI is such that will happen. What I can do is I can say, well, let's look at the total fares, and we can see the highest total fares quite significantly. Really, it's into JFK. So let's look at the average fares, which is probably the one we want. We've not got an average fares. I haven't got an average fares. I need to write an average fares. We can drop that in. Do that before we go. Oh, it's interesting. But we can look at passenger counts as well. So we can see where the passengers are going, where the higher passenger levels are. And we see that's in Manhattan, that there seem to be higher numbers. JFK is slightly higher. We see LaGuardia as well is a little bit more yellow to it. Okay. Look at the total tips, see where the tips are. Again, the airports seem to come through. So airports, you can really start to see and understand a lot more about your data quite quickly using these disconnected tables, because they've allowed me to hand off big levels of the analysis effectively to my consumers. So we can see the tip percentages are high around Manhattan. See, that's Queens, isn't it? Got the JFK, the airports, obviously. But then as we go into some of these other areas, we're seeing that it's really not particularly great, is it? So what we can see from our tip percentage, for example, is that we've got lots around the airport. We've got quite a high tip percentage around the airport. Through Brooklyn, as we come out into parts of Queens, it seems to be dropping. You know, we've got some really interesting data that starts to come out of it, isn't it, really? Especially, again, when we overlay and think through that we had the issues in 2021 that our tips percentage, sorry, in 2020, that our tip percentages just got really low. What's triggering the decrease? So being able to do this, it pulls your analysis to a whole new level. So what do you reckon then? Disconnected tables, disconnected slicers, whatever you're going to call them, right? They are a powerful way of expanding and extending your analysis. Building what-if scenarios is a great way of doing projections towards the future. As you want to go in and do those, though, you kind of need to have a good, solid data model in terms of the what has happened, because it's your future projections are only going to be as good as the foundations that they're built on. But your what-if analyses can be very good for saying, well, if we assume that our cost of goods is going to go up next year or come down, or we know we're going to have this change, the inflation rate is going to be blah, what's it going to mean? We can go through and actually adjust and see what that data set would be like in that different scenario. So it's great for future planning, but it's not the same as like a future projection as such. You're more replaying the past with a different lens, and that's going to have an impact. The capability, though, of being able to use disconnected tables to make your analysis much simpler. So for us, with this, the addition of a drop-down would allow it to then be used much more simply to assess and see the impact of different measures across our data set. We can use the titles and the dynamic titling capability of Power BI to then go through and understand the differences in the number formatting that are lost because disconnected tables don't support that. And for all, yes, it's a weakness. Ultimately, because of understanding what's going on, it's a single DAX statement that's returning something. It can only hold a single number format. It can't hold multiple formats for the number and how it should be processed and displayed. So you're kind of best sticking to a generic one and then updating your values to be in that format, and then using some kind of dynamic titling like we've shown, because it's all just baked into that one table to cover everything that we need. And in terms of if our data changes over time, grows, expands, it's not too difficult to update that. If we need to add a row, we can add a row. We update and add a row to the switch statement, and everything else will just work for us. So it's well worth considering. I hope you've enjoyed that today, though. I know I've enjoyed doing this. I really do like the New York data set videos and the stuff that we've got in the data sets from New York. Our UK food hygiene one is great as well. So we'll probably go and spend a couple of weeks in that, I think. Or maybe I'll find something new. For now, though, have a great weekend. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves and each other. Ta-ra.